Thank you for joining us for another edition of Lead.exe. I'm Brian Comerford in Denver.
And I'm Nick Lozano in Washington, D.C.
Today we've got a special guest joining us, Scott Smeester. He is the head of the CIO/CTO Mastermind. I'm not sure if I'm going to get all the acronyms in there correctly, Scott. Mastermind.
Think Tank Brain Trust.
The CIO/CTO Mastermind Think Tank Brain Trust. It's a mouthful.
And the acronym is CIO/CTO MMTTBT.
In technology, we love our acronyms. So
exactly. That's why I did
perfectly.
it. That's why I did it. It's obnoxious on purpose.
It's memorable, that's for sure.
Rolls right off the tongue.
When you get used to
it. Scott considers himself an interim CIO, which we'll talk about a little bit how that differs from a fractional CIO. And part of the reason that we're interested in having him join us today is someone who is a skilled technologist by background, who also considers himself to be a technologist with executive tendencies. We felt it would be beneficial
a geek with executive tendencies.
Officially. I love it. We thought it would be beneficial to walk through some of the transition points that we know a lot of technologists who find themselves in leadership roles are challenged with. So Scott, welcome. Thank you for being willing to join us and spend some time chatting with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Can you tell us a little bit about your own background and really from a technology standpoint all the way up through what brought you into a leadership role, just kind of as a starting point?
Yeah, from a technology standpoint, ever since I was a little kid, I kind of programmed, and I've always been involved with software and in high school and all that. I just remember all the different languages I've learned throughout the years. When I went to college, I got a degree in civil engineering, which is all infrastructure. It's all about that infrastructure. But following college, I went into sales for a couple of years, and then I started a company doing web development. That was in about 95 and 97-ish. I kind of went downtown and built a company in the internet bubble. That was at about, through the 2007 through 2003-ish. And then following that, I took a hit on that, and I just kept consulting within web development, and I always kept that as a thread, even though I was involved in other and subsequent companies following that as either as an entrepreneur or as a co-founder. I always kept my development skills up to date. It was something that just generally paid the bills. And I always had an interest in it. I love it. I love to touch the code and do code. And even just a few years ago, I went back to one of those boot camps and spent 10 weeks learning all the JavaScript platforms and all that kind of stuff, just because it's what I like to do. So that's it in a nutshell. About 3 or 4 years ago, I saw a need that companies are lacking real advocacy. And so that's kind of where I am now. I call myself a CIO, but I look at myself more as an advocate to CEOs and CFOs and stakeholders of small and mid-sized companies to help them elevate, the performance of their technology to their company.
That's great. Tell me a little bit about your definition of interim CIO versus fractional CIO. These are terms that we hear kind of thrown around a lot. There's sort of a big buzz about it. And certainly I think from a business owner or executive level perspective, understanding where they might want to tap one versus another or actually hire someone full time, I think is probably an open question to leaders of businesses.
I have a real simple answer. Interim, you want to get the hell out. Fractional, you want to stay in.
Nice, straight, clear-cut answer. I like it.
Yeah, I say I'm an interim because I like to do short, short projects. I got to get moving on. I got to, I don't want to be in the same, even though I just got a new client and I'm the fractional CTO of this client all of a sudden. I am, but I think I prefer more of the shorter term, thing. And I think that there are better people cut out to be more of the corporate CIO fractional to full-time role. And that's definitely not me. I'm not a good corporate guy.
You sound like you always kind of constantly like to be learning when you're giving your description earlier. So I could see where, being full-time CIO, CTO is probably not your thing. You kind of lose that ability to constantly be learning and kind of go directions you want to go.
Yep. There's better people for that. And I can make a living doing it on a smaller scale, so to speak.
So talk a little bit about what really started your interest in helping to facilitate the working group that you're currently overseeing. What really launched that concept, and what's firing your passion related to that?
I needed it. And it didn't exist that I knew, that I saw. I was at the end of last year, I was working on getting a fractional or interim type of CIO gig. And it was with a pretty good sized company, a $215 million freight company. They had really old system, an AS4000, whatever it was, AS4000 system, and it was old. And there's a lot of low hanging fruit that I actually ended up, that I see, but I wanted to have the ability to be able to talk with other CIOs. I just started to verbalize that. That's kind of what I do when I have kind of a challenge or something like that. I just verbalize that to people that I know, my trusted advisors and business people that I know. And one of them said, what you need is a mastermind group. And I'm familiar with the term from kind of Napoleon Hill. And I've been involved in like the alternative boards. And here's one locally in Denver called the 3 to 5 Club that I was a member of. Very great clubs. And learned a lot of things through those. And I was like, oh, dang it, that would be great if it was just CIOs and IT executives who are leading and dealing at the C level. And I said, it's what we need. And it wasn't around Denver. So, and I say it this way, in Elon Musk fashion, I needed it. I'm an entrepreneur. Might as well go and create it because I'm sure others need it. And it's the right thing to do. We need to spend time together, and we need to advocate for each other, and we need to help each other because this is a lonely gig, but it's important. In fact, it's no longer an option. It's small and medium-sized business just 3 to 5 years ago. Technology seemed like, even though it wasn't, it was kind of perceived as an option. Now, all of a sudden, with all the breaches and all the seriousness around all the data and the compliance and all the things you hear about, all of a sudden the CEOs and the stakeholders are taking notice, and we're like, got to integrate it into the business. And now's the time. And we need to work with each other to do it right and to do it profitably and to do it, in my opinion, kind of small projects first to lead to the bigger ones.
That's great. I mean, I know the great thing about working groups, mastermind groups, is bringing everyone together. And I know as technology people, we're kind of having the brunt of GDPR, California Privacy Act, breach compliance from New York, to the point where, senior leadership is turning to IT and asking them, how they need to solve these legal problems or what they should be doing. So I feel like having that mastermind group is kind of good, where you can kind of turn to up here and say, well, what are you guys doing with that? How are you guys handling GDPR?
Right.
Especially when you have financial regulations, you can't delete specific things, but GDPR says that you can, you're supposed to delete anything that somebody says them to delete to. So, I mean, it's really great that you're running a working group mastermind, and I'm sure your members find it very beneficial.
Yeah. So far, the feedback's been great. And I just feel like this has led to something really cool because I feel like it's really, really needed, and I like to do it, and it feels right. It's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's part of what I can contribute that I think is a real differentiator for what you've put together, Scott. There are working groups where, particularly the one that Nick and I tend to be involved in, has more of an industry specific focus. So I love that, what you're doing spans across industry types. Mm-hmm. Similarly, the exclusion of vendors is always important. If you go to a conference, you may have some semblance of, top level leadership.
Yeah, lunches behind the expo floor, right?
Right. Yes.
Yes.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, there are no free lunches, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Just act like you're deaf and walk right past.
But most importantly to me is the agile approach that you've taken to the structure of how the Mastermind group works. So ultimately, if you can walk us through some of that, I think, it's beneficial to really understand, what the value is that's being derived by leaders who come with bottlenecks, that they're able to present in a time-boxed fashion, and then really evoke the feedback and insight from other leaders in the room.
Yeah, well, that's a key. So, one of the things that I've noticed that a lot of the members or even the potential members, nobody's really doing Agile in their business. I mean, the CIOs are surrounded by CEOs and CFOs and boards, and none of them are doing it. They don't know. Yeah, they don't know what Agile is, but they believe in the concept. They hear about it a lot. They would really like to do it in their own organization. Probably just hasn't roll it out yet. I believe in it, and it needs to be done just the general format of Agile. I'm not the Agile expert, but so yeah, part of our group. We do a problem solving sessions that we call bottlenecks, and it's a structured format, 15 minute. And they're all structured based on get us history, make sure that we understand everything, followed by, okay, now we're going to help you solve the problem. And yeah, it's structured, and we really kind of stick to that time. We have to, but yet we get deep. We have to get deep. And it's really important to do that in this. So these meetings are not, we run 3.5 hour meetings. It's not the 15-minute stand-up meeting that you're used to. But nonetheless, we run the organization that way too. For instance, we're starting a steering committee, and I've been asked recently, so when are we going to meet? What are we going to do? And I'm recommending we should meet every 2 weeks. We should meet, 7:30 in the morning for 15 to 20 minutes, get in and get out. We're not meeting for the sake of meeting. We're getting on this conference call. We're going to talk about these issues, and we're going to run sprints too, because we want things to get done. And we're going to decide upon 2-week sprints. What can you get done in 2 weeks? And that's kind of what we're going to run the organization as well. So, the CIOs that are in the group, they're getting a lot more taste of this, and I hope that it spreads through their organizations.
That's great. I just want to see. I was kind of perusing your blog here before we got on, and I saw your article on the digital transformation and executive leaders, and you made 4 key points, like it was perspective, presentation, promotion, and positive learning. And what really intrigued me was your positive learning comment there. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, bring me back to what I wrote.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
When was that? Just 2 months ago? Oh gosh, I know it's no way.
So I guess it was more your positive learning you were going over. It's more about micro learning instead of, going to all day sessions where you kind of sit down and learn something. You kind of, maybe taking a podcast that's like a 15-minute thing, or you sit down and you learn through a boot camp, maybe one that's not 10 weeks, but maybe one that's like 2 days or something like that.
Right. Yeah. you can't sit all day long, and we try to break down. And by the way, that's part of our group too, is we're always, bio breaks is what I get all these things. I call everything that we do in our group through things that I learned while being on some teams. I was on Scrum teams for about 5 years. And so bio breaks and retros are looking back instead of postmortems.
Yeah.
We call them retros and all that lingo. I do believe in breaking down chunks into learning, and that's what we do in this group. And I mean, so I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question.
No, you're
okay.
fine.
Okay.
No worries at all.
Well, part of what I think is interesting, just hearing that little bit of context, the approach of micro learning. Technology is moving at such a rapid pace, and this is why probably 2 months to you, Scott, seems like an aeon ago, right?
Right.
It's
my blog, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a constantly flowing river.
Yeah, you've got a lot of content in there, so I can't imagine you can remember everything you wrote.
Just specifically. So yeah.
But I think that's true for technologists as much as anyone else who's challenged on the leadership side. And when you put the two of those things together, I think part of the role of where the technology leader finds themselves is really getting it from both sides. I mean, you've got to keep your knowledge going at a pace that's keeping up with what is relevant and new in technology, but you also have to be able to inform people who are not dialed into the geek speak, who just want to understand what's the relevance to the business.
Yeah, that's a fine line. It's a hard one to tell. It's a hard one to try to find it, people who are both engineers and in sales type of, or executive type of people. So my mother was an accountant. She comes from a line of engineering type people. So ironically, and then my father's side, he came from like insurance sales. We have a couple of different generations of sales. And then I was in sales for a while too. And being entrepreneurial, you got to do a lot of sales. So you get a lot of side, the other side of that. So it's just one of those balances. And yeah, I try to stay up on technology because that's my love. I like to go to vendor things because I like to learn a lot, but I also go to like meetups. Most recently, I was involved with virtual reality. A lot of geeks in that one, a lot of geeks in the virtual reality meetup. But yeah, so, and what else? There's some other geeky things. Well, yeah, anyway.
Well, one of the things that I thought was valuable that you and I had talked about previously was the need for developing use cases, right? How do you take all the geek terminology, which is inclusive of costs that usually blow people's minds when they're not familiar with, the expenses related to technology investment, and you put those things into a context where now you're communicating in the language of business as a technologist. Can you walk us through a little bit of what you do in terms of coaching related to that?
So, yeah, well, okay. So this is the way I look at this. This is a practice. Use cases, business use cases, and case studies are a practice. And it's something that we all need to be engaged in because the stakeholders, their language is financial. And so what we need to do is we need to look at the impact we're having, and not always financial, but if you start there, you're going to generally be good. If you work it in terms of financials, and then the impact on also lowering risk always. And when we're developing case studies, I'm always asking kind of the question. Again, I play the advocate, and this group is about again being that advocate role for the companies, for the CEOs who aren't in this group. So I'm always asking, so I'm CEO, tell me, why do you want to do this? So we're doing this. This is the role that we play in this group. We have to say, okay, well, you're talking about this, security protocol or whatever, some type of thing. And, tell us. In fact, we're doing this right now with one of our members. They're talking about cybersecurity. What are they going to do with it? And we're asking the questions from an advocacy standpoint. show us the numbers, show us the money. And he's like, okay, great. Yeah, we have to go to the drawing board. And so what does that look like? Well, we're working on the structure of that. We don't really have that nailed down right now, but it's going to be, the impact. I mean, again, we're structuring it. Show me the impact to the company and the values to the company and how does this fit? And then what's maybe the financial impact? Where's the costs? And show us why we should do this.
I think you bring up a good point. I feel like a lot of people, when they start out in IT, and like Brian said, they come up from back offices and they're not quite exposed to, the business side of stuff, and justifying, an expense to a CEO. When you come in and you say you need all this Meraki equipment, all this Cisco endpoint security, and then you show them the sticker price number, and you can't really, justify how that's a return on investment, how that's, that cost is worth it. You've got to be able to speak the language of business, and I feel like that's lacking a lot with a lot of leaders. Even just the basic understanding of accounting is helpful, accounting and finance.
Exactly. Well, a typical IT exec and this isn't true for everyone, but they're not really looking at like what a breach really would cost, what the whole scope of that is. Or maybe I shouldn't say a CEO or a CIO doesn't. A typical CEO and the board stakeholder doesn't really understand that. This is what the real, but we have IT execs have had a hard time and not been very good at describing the real ramifications of that. This is what it looks like. Your downtime, okay, yeah, you have all of your files. Yes, you do. You've backed up all of your files. That's good. But if we go down, here's really what has to happen. We have to replicate this here and there, and this whole group will be done for weeks. They're not going to be able to do it, or whatever that is. And then when you start really doing that and start really, and this is, I know I've seen that we lack doing this, but if we do that, you'll have no problem getting the resources that you need. And that can be monetized. That can be shown from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, this is one area that a lot of technologists tend to be, very familiar with, but have difficulty harnessing it for business purposes, and that's working with the data. Right?
Yeah.
So, one example that I think of is from, ticket analysis. You look at the types of ticket closures that you might have in a particular site, or ticket closures of a particular type. That's really data that's being surfaced that can help you build some of these business cases you're talking about.
Right.
If you've got one particular location that is bottlenecked, they're having massive ticket closures. That right there can help you start building the case for adding an additional resource to that location. Or if you've got data where you continue to see issues of a particular type, that may also be another indication that it's time to start leaning out some of your technical debt, maybe do some systems replacements or modernization. But connecting the dots in those ways isn't necessarily always at the forefront of what a lot of technologists are thinking.
Right.
So when they make that transition into the leadership role, that's part of where I see your approach really around those business cases as being very critical.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say on that note, when you're doing the business cases and you're creating kind of well, we call them, first of all, business use cases, and then case studies. Case studies looking back, and then business use cases looking forward. If you haven't done that, I mean, the way that I look at it too, and this is a way to kind of do an agile approach to projects, is do smaller projects. Start with some smaller projects that you can get some wins on. Start thinking in terms of what the wins and how you're going to get an ROI on it. And because you should be starting with the smaller projects anyway before doing big projects.
No, I really like that definition. That the case studies are looking back, the business use cases are really looking forward. Walk us through a little bit about, why would you create a case study if you're already in a leadership role? Is it something that you do to help define kind of what the current state is for other executives who might be part of a decision-making matrix?
Help me out with that last part. The reason I want case studies looking backward. Mm-hmm. The reason I want case studies is because I want a portfolio to be able to show, my successes. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to, well, and in Denver, I don't know about anywhere else, but I suspect it's probably similar in similar sized cities. CIOs go through pretty extended periods of unemployment when they do go. Then that's not the same. Obviously, there's a negative unemployment rate for like developers and things like that, but not for IT executives, especially at the higher ranks. And I've seen that a lot. And a lot of times the reason is, and then I ask to see, and I'm happy to help look at their resume, because I can look at it like a CEO. And a lot of times the resumes that I'm getting from people who are in transition of CIOs, I'm looking at a resume and it's telling me how they did this big transformation to AWS from their CRM and all these acronyms. And I'm like, okay. And then I don't see dollar amounts. I don't see talking about risks and discussions about how you might have moved people up in their roles because they was able to automate things or whatever it might be. None of that. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the importance of case studies. So I want these in transition CIOs to be able to talk to a CEO and say, oh, here's my portfolio of all the different things that I've done over the last 2 years. Totaling, what's that say there? 15 billion or whatever it might be. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, I mean, there's a significant, in my opinion, we're data people. So there it is. It's good for us. It helps us out when we know that that's our data.
I really like that concept because it gets you thinking about the technology impact of what you've done and also the business impact. And it kind of helps you kind of spin the wheels. And like you said, when it comes time to write that resume, you can then, put it in business speak because, another IT person's not going to hire you. So it's normally going to be HR looking at it like AWS, RDS database with Lambda. Like, well, I don't know what any of this is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter because it's about the business. It's not about the technology.
Yeah, that's a great point. Do you have a preferred format, or what is there sort of a templatized version that you use, or how do you usually structure what you put together for those?
Well, okay, so I'll be quite honest. We're developing that right now. I am actually working with a CIO that I've been trying to get as a guest, who has a whole portfolio of case studies. So the history of it, basically, you just have to go through the history, what the problem was, what the challenge was, kind of a start with a SWOT analysis, what the threats were, maybe some opportunities if that was an opportunity, because not all, technology initiatives are about, security and lowering risk. It's about generating revenue. So that might be what it's about. And so while I'm working on it, this is the way that we're doing it. We go through kind of the history, just like we do in a bottleneck, basically. Kind of go through the history, go through the deep dive of what the challenge was. Maybe even there was some political challenges and things like that. And then talk about the solution, what maybe some of the alternatives and the options were, and what cost might have been or might be in this particular situation. And then the impact, the final impact. Okay, you did this, and this is what happened at the end of the day. And here's some of the positive things, even if it's not a financial thing. Maybe, morale went up because somebody in the office doesn't have to do this anymore. So yeah, there's a whole, and you shouldn't do it more than 2 pages. It shouldn't be longer than 2 pages. 1 page, preferably. because these are things that are going to CEOs. So it's not a ton of work to have to do and write. It's some, but make it simple, because everything in front of a CEO should be on a one page. Your story should be on one page. So maybe one page per case study, in my opinion.
That's great advice.
Agilely, type of thing.
Sure. Agilely. Yes.
It's a new word.
So let's go the other direction and talk a little bit about the business use cases. So the forward-looking orientation. So walk us through, what's the purpose behind creating this kind of document, and sort of the same things. What are the underlying dynamics? What's the format?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a business use case maybe just end up being a presentation. But again, it's going to be kind of the similar format. What's the problem? Really, you got to, I guess it's second nature to me, because it's engineering. Mm-hmm. Engineering is doing nothing but problem solving. That's all I did in 4.5 years of college, was just solve problems. Solve problems is the same thing. What you got to do is you got to define the problem, define what's happening, what's the effect of that. That effect might be costs, it might be always go costs, because you're going to need to justify that. And there's going to be costs. You can find time through that, and you can do a whole analysis. But so you define the problem, then you find several different solutions for stakeholders, because there's the way I like to, there's a good, better, best, or maybe, and put it in terms of a CEO, a car style, mm-hmm. Are you a Porsche, or you just a little get by Honda thing. And so, you kind of give the stakeholders, eventually, this is where you're gonna have to tell them a story. Here's the 3 options we have. We can go kind of on the low end here, and this is the best thing option. This is the Porsche, if we want it, but it's going to cost this. Now, here's my professional opinion on here's going to be the results of this, and you're going to present that. And here's the resources I need. Here's the expectations. It's like a proposal, really, is all it is. Mm-hmm. And I do a ton of those, but yeah, it's just a proposal. And so, but. Again, CIOs have not really done a lot of that in the past. They've been the one proposed to. They've gotten proposals, but we need to. Or did I say CEO? CIOs haven't had to do a lot of that in the past, but we should. We need to make business use cases.
I like your concept of breaking it down, and like, this is a Toyota Corolla, this is the the Lamborghini.
Yeah,
it's kind of like how people are used to seeing things now. When you shop on Amazon, it's like, oh, here's these things. You want to compare them all right down here in a row, and you can make a decision in 30 seconds. Just by looking at that. So that's a really interesting concept. I really like that.
Yeah, try to equate it in terms of what they're used to. Mm-hmm. Even just good, better, best is helpful.
Yeah, and it also, I think, opens the door for some additional dialogue around some of these things, because the explicit value may not always be something that is clearly understood by everyone who has to be part of that discussion. I think for technologists, we have to deal with, the sleepless nights when we've got, aging architecture and old systems, and but from the perspective of someone who, maybe on the business side, they're looking at a 6-figure investment in something where they don't actually see the problem. It's because we know, just like when you're driving an old car, right? Even if it's a Lamborghini, you gotta have proper maintenance. There's got to be some repair work done, and there comes a certain end of life for whatever any of those things are. And at the speed of technology moving today, there are so many new modernized efficiency plays with systems where you've got API handling, you've got a lot of these other things that allow you to bake in some of the automation capabilities that simply aren't possible with some of the legacy systems.
Yeah.
So there's another translation of business value there, where it may not be explicit on the front end that there are some actual efficiency gains that at the end of the day, it starts adding up into a real, plus on the increase in productivity side.
Yeah. Well, we have a really good opportunity in front of us, I believe. Now, really good opportunity in front of us, and we're going to make a big impact on industry. It's time for us to take that leadership and to take the technology that's available to us now and put it to use, like we know we can. Why, you and I know that the where we're at with AI and there's so many things that can improve a company.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't they doing it? Well, we're probably the bottleneck then, because the upper management haven't bought in on it yet for some reason or other, and we're probably the ones. It rolls uphill.
Yeah, or they see the Lamborghini and they're like, I want that. Can you give me Google's, prediction engine when you type in there and it instantly knows what you want?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That actually is my vision.
I mean, that thing is so creepy sometimes. You'll type like one or two words and it's already got the whole sentence. I'm like, it's amazing, but creepy at the same time.
Yeah.
So paving the way for the techno proletariat is what I'm hearing.
Perhaps.
All right, Nick, it's your turn.
Yeah.
I keep jamming up the conversation.
No, you're fine. You're asking questions. So I just want to ask you, are there any books that you gift to people or that you've read that's had a big impact on you? Or not necessarily books, or just anything question. In general?
Well, one that comes to mind recently this is total CIO. This is not who I really am day to day, but I did get a free book at a seminar I went to for robotic process automation. Mm-hmm. It's how to roll it out. And it's geeky from the sense that you got to know what you're doing politically before you start doing any of that kind of work. Mm-hmm. And so I found that really interesting. Personally, I like and am fascinated by psychology, human psychology, mm-hmm. and in particular, kind of sales psychology. It's just a fascination I have. I like to read books. I'm trying to think of the author who does, he does these studies about human psychology, sales psychology, really cool stuff. That's some of the stuff I like to understand, and heuristics and whatnot. Mm-hmm. People do fascinate me. I love studying people.
I'll give you a book recommendation. There's a book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. It's basically a negotiation book, but he spent 25 years as an FBI hostage negotiator as a specialist in that. So when you go through it, it's really interesting. He goes through like how he labels people and how he puts them in a category and what personality determines how you should answer questions. It's not a very long book, and just you talking about psychology and all that, I think that's something you'd probably really enjoy.
Yeah, cool. Let's check that out. I will write it down right now. Just kidding.
I can send it to you that way. It's no worries.
Yeah, please do.
There's a Ben Horowitz book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. It's one that for anyone who's dealing with both entrepreneurship as well as being challenged with all of the leadership difficulties that can come along with a technology-driven business in particular. It's just an invaluable book, and he is such a witty writer. I've never read another book, I don't think, that uses quotes from his favorite rap artists at the head of each chapter.
Nice.
Which, believe it or not, can be incredibly enlightening in and of itself.
Yeah.
I've never read that.
So you both owe me an email with those authors, those books.
we will totally do that.
Because I do. I like to buy books from recommendations. Yep, I will.
And Scott, I know you've kind of like, just hearing your backstory, you've always kind of been an entrepreneur, it seems like. Do you have any advice for somebody if they're looking to kind of get into entrepreneurship, like what they should be thinking, like some of the challenges, or just like anything that you learned that you're like, man, I wish I knew that when I first started down this journey of entrepreneurship?
At this point, the thing that I would say is that the further you go in your research, like there's a point where you have to put your stake in the ground and say, okay, I got to make money.
Mm-hmm.
But before then, you do a lot of research and you check the market and you find this is the way I did it. Talk to a lot of people, try to sell a lot of stuff and find what you want to do. So I knew there was more. So when I first started back in business after I said, I spent 5 years on development teams and things like that, I had to get out and I went back in. I went into the kind of the managed services business and I was calling myself a cybersecurity person because I went to a networking event. This was 3 years ago, and I tried to describe doing workflows through APIs. That was my other business idea, was actually doing work. That flew over people's heads, man. And then I said, oh, and then I do cybersecurity. Oh, cybersecurity. So that, for me, I was like, oh, okay, so that's where I'm going to go. And it's different because at the time, people weren't saying cybersecurity. Well, they did, and all these managed service providers were doing the same thing, and there was nothing, and there's tons of them, and there's tons of people saying that they do cybersecurity. So I'm like, I'm not going to do that anymore. I got to find something different. But through that whole process, by trying to sell cybersecurity solutions, here's what I saw. I sell to the CEOs. I sell to the stakeholders, and there's nowhere else to go. So I was selling to stakeholders, and the CEO would typically say, oh, I don't handle security. That's the IT guys, right? But that's where I started to think. I'm like, okay, well, how do you overcome that objection? And why is that important? Well, they really don't even know what's the deal, how much risk they have or whatever. And who they're listening to is either their employee or a vendor. And I'm like, okay, something's wrong here. And then I started asking them, I said, well, tell me then, who do you have who has no skin in the game, who's not trying to sell you something or tell you what you want to hear? And that's when they would say, I don't have anybody. I'm like, okay, that's where the opportunity is. And that sounds to me like where they need advisory services. And then I started, okay, well, that's a CIO. So there's a market for CIOs, but then it wasn't until that I was a CIO and really went to the market with really doing that for the last couple of years. I'm like, I need a peer advisory group, really.
Yeah.
You know? And so then you go to the next step and you're like, okay, well, that's going to be the next business. And I recommend going through that process. That might take 3 years to do that, to find that, because I don't have much competition in that. And it's led to a lot of other cool business opportunities.
That's really great insight. Really appreciate you sharing that.
You just keep going until you find the market, the need. Somebody's going to eventually, back when I was running an internet development firm back in about 2000, we had built a time tracking application. This is back in Cold Fusion, running on an old SQL database. And my company, my people,
This is Brian. Brian was Cold Fusion.
Language.
Yeah, Brian was Cold Fusion.
Cold Fusion, I loved Cold Fusion. It was great.
Me too.
We built this time tracking thing, and it was about 1999, 2000. I remember talking to my business development guy. I'm like, why don't we just sell this to like other web development firms and spin up? We don't have to recreate the wheel every time, every stinking project. This was before Agile. We don't have to create a whole new application. Why don't we just like spin this up into another server or something like that? That ended up becoming software as a service. Then when my company started going downhill in about 2002, 2003, and I started having trouble finding more business, and my employee count went from like 9 down to 2, and I had this big office space. I'm like, doggone it, it'd be really cool is if I could get those desks filled up with like maybe a database guy over on that one, and maybe a graphic designer over on that one, paying small amounts just to have a desk, and we all kind of collaborate. Well, that ended up becoming
WeWork, huh?
the co-working. Yeah, exactly. That was in 2003. I mean, by the way, I did do that. I had like one guy paying me $200 a month for a desk. I just didn't follow through with it. This time I'm following through.
That in itself is a great statement right there. Always follow through, no matter what, no matter how harebrained your idea may sound.
Give it 5 years.
That could be our own banner slogan, couldn't it, Nick?
Yeah, give it 5 years.
Actually, 5 is too long. 2 to 3 is probably sufficient anymore.
We were thinking give it 5 months.
5 minutes. I don't know.
That's right.
That's Agile.
Yep. What's that saying? Fail fast, fail often, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
That's so true. So true.
Yes, there's also a Japanese saying, to continue is to succeed.
Never heard that one. That's great, Brian.
Like it.
So I know we're coming up on your time here and want to be respectful of your time, Scott. If anyone's kind of looking for you, where can they find you, get a hold of you?
My name is Scott Smeester. It's very rare that you'll find anyone who's not Smeester. Smeester.com, or just, my email is scott@smeester.com. Maybe I shouldn't put that in there, but it don't matter. I got Google.
There you go.
It's out there anyway. I mean, whatever.
People are good at finding that stuff anyways. It'll surprise you sometimes. I'll get random vendors call my personal cell phone. It's like, oh, I got that somehow.
Oh, so there's a geek thing I do. I like to go to these like capture the flag things, or like a security thing. I went to one down in Colorado Springs for it was literally for the FBI. They put it on. This guy put it on. He's like, okay, I want you to find my current address and the cost of my last home and my current phone number. That was our challenge, because he's like, it's out there, and he didn't care. And that's what we had to do.
Yeah. It's at the point I'm with it. I'm like, oh, well, whatever. What can you do? Like, everybody's leaking everybody's data these days. I don't know. I can't stop anybody else from doing that.
You just don't want to do anything wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If you just not do anything wrong, you'll be all right, I think.
It's good that he didn't lead with a challenge saying, I want you to find the last 4 of my social and the most commonly used credit card number.
There's a way for that too. There's a way for that.
Right. I don't know.
It just might have taken longer. I might still be doing it.
It was hosted by the FBI. They might have been looking for somebody when they did that.
That's right.
Yeah, who's the real good performer?
Yeah, exactly.
Who's the best?
Exactly.
You could have a new career.
That's a good way of doing it. Because, you go after their arrogance.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You do. Geeks have a certain level of arrogance.
So do engineers too, right? When you were talking earlier, I was thinking, I don't know if you're familiar with
one and the same.
I don't know if you're familiar with the webcomic XKCD by the guy who used to be a physicist at NASA. And he's like, how an engineer looks at, the half glass full thing. You know how like some people say, oh, the glass is half full, glass half empty.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like the engineer sees a glass that is twice as big as than it needs to be. It's like either
totally
half full or
inefficient.
half empty. Yeah. It's just, twice the size. Inefficient.
Exactly.
It's impractical.
Yeah.
Well, I put a meme. I was doing memes a few weeks ago, and I put one on there that I said, in the small and medium-sized businesses, they don't have CIOs. Mm-hmm. A lot of times they just have an IT guy or girl or whatever. And so I kind of made this meme. It's of Bill Gates holding this big ass ping pong paddle. This thing is enormous, and he's hitting this ball. And and the meme said, "How you budget for whatever digital transformation without a CIO." You just make your paddle huge,
Just spend money.
Yes.
It'll work.
You just spend money, spend it away.
Yep. I mean, I do see that with smaller organizations. That's how they tend to do. It's like, oh, we've got Samantha over there. She's our IT help desk. So, we'll give her the web development. She can handle that. That's
right.
Yep. Exactly.
That's how many database administrators are born.
Exactly. You just get something random. You're like, I don't know how to do this. So I hope this doesn't break it when I run this SQL command.
Yep.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for taking time with us today. And I know that I've found a lot of value in the CIO CTO Mastermind group so far, and best of luck on its continuance. And
thank you.
To my opportunities to continue to participate in it as well.
Yes, thank you, Scott.
Good. All right. Thank you too. Appreciate it.